is great to be joined by Senator Marco Rubio of Florida, and he's got two pieces of legislation addressing something near and dear to me because I have two kids already in school and one on the way next fall. And when you see these school shootings, it's a plague in our country. We see it too often, way too often, to similar people, similar problems with security. And then people say, well, there's no solutions. But there are senators with solutions, putting forward solutions, and sometimes there's not getting enough attention. We wanted to make sure Senator Rubio could get attention on two solutions he's got in the U.S. Senate.
So, Senator Rubio, thanks for being with us. This is Jay Sekulow. I'm glad you're on. You've got two bills that you've been working on for years to help prevent these mass shootings in schools. Will you explain this? Because I think we have to. You've got reasonable solutions here that need to move forward.
Yeah, so part of what bothers me every time this happens is that they come out with a bunch of solutions that people are in favor of because they want to restrict guns or whatever their personal views on it might be, but it has nothing to do with the actual shooting. Like they wouldn't have prevented what actually happened. My point is we can continue to debate that other stuff, but if the goal is to stop these shootings, then we need to be focused on passing things that has a chance to stop these shootings. So two things. The first is we now have sufficient, and have had for a long time, research that tells us, by and large, who are the people that do this. There's a lot of commonality. And generally, you're talking about a young man who suffers some early childhood trauma of some sort, child abuse, sexual abuse, broken home, whatever it may be, who starts to get disconnected, starts having self-hate, transforms that self-hate into hatred of others, starts blaming others, gets fascinated with guns, making threats for a suspended period of time, in some cases even acting out, and then one day walks into a gun store, registered legal gun store, passes a background check, never committed a crime before, and buys a gun and commits a mass murder. So the first piece of legislation is to use the Secret Service's well-established National Threat Assessment Center to identify people who are headed in this direction weeks, months, potentially years before they become a killer. And the second piece of legislation is an intervention that allows states like Florida has done with due process to be able to go to court and show the evidence to a judge and say, look, this person's headed in a really bad direction. We're worried about it. And put a red flag on their record so that they can't go in and buy a gun. Obviously the person's going to get due process and make an argument against it. And in Florida, we have penalties for false claims and things of this nature. And I think it's best done at the state level. You don't want a federal law that does it because many cities in America don't have a federal courthouse, and federal agencies aren't going to do this. I mean, it's going to be your local sheriff's department or police officers are going to do it. But the notion of identifying this profile and intervening before they actually kill people is the best way, the most effective way, and I believe primarily the only way that we're going to keep this from continuing to happen.
So, Ruby, I wanted to go to the second bill first because I think people probably want to know more about it. Because it involves a legal process. And when I read about this piece of legislation and your work on it, and how it's been used in Florida specifically, because people use Florida as kind of an example of a conservative state they like to follow. And this is a law similar in Florida. And it's been used, you said, over 3,000 times. And likely those 3,000 times, it prevents another Parkland. It prevents another shooting like in Texas. It prevents another one of these horrendous events. And it adds another tool for law enforcement, but it still allows for due process. So key items for people who are listening right now.
Yeah, and it's not permanent. So you're going to have to keep going back to court every 6 months and to prove your case if you think this is an ongoing threat from this individual. And generally, the way it's used as a family member becomes very concerned about somebody. And in many cases, it's not because they're going to kill somebody else. It's because they're going to kill themselves. And so they're like, look, I'm really worried about this person. This person has a bunch of guns, has become fascinated with guns, are talking about hurting themselves, hurting other people. And this is a restraining order is what it basically is. Like we have existing restraining orders for domestic violence and things of that nature. But it also it also can only be filed by law enforcement. In essence, you have to convince a police department to do it, right? They have to go to court and do it. You can't do it yourself. You can't just go into a courtroom and say, hey, my ex-boyfriend or ex-girlfriend is dangerous. Will you take away their guns? So there's that extra step of protection. And obviously, look, they have to go in and make the case. There's got to be evidence provided convincing a judge of a court order, just like we do when the police want to go into your home and search it. They got to have a court order. So it uses the same process. We don't have, at least as of now, seen evidence of it being misused. There's a push to have a federal version of that. I don't think a federal version of it is a good idea. I don't think the FBI and these agencies are going to be focused on this stuff. I just don't think they have the manpower or the focus on it. I think it's best left at the state level. And states don't need us to pass a bill to do it. We're just trying to incentivize them to do it.
Senator, let me ask you this. Amongst your colleagues, Because I'm with you. I think we've got to have common sense measures here. You can protect the Second Amendment and also can protect children's lives. What's your sense among your colleagues, both Republican and Democrats, on this legislation?
Look, I think they haven't received these bills have been out there for 4 years now, okay, and they haven't gotten voted on for one primary reason. Let's not forget now, Joe Biden's been in the White House for over a year. Democrats have had Congress for over a year. They haven't moved on any of these things yet, and the reason why is because they're based. People that are out there demanding want things like preventing guns based on what they look like, not what they do, not how dangerous they are, but what they look like. Or expanded background checks. We already have expanded virtually every gun that's going to be sold in America today is going to have a background check conducted. Every one of these mass shooters passed the background check. So there's still a perception out there among people that you can just walk in and buy a gun in the store and nobody checks you out. That's just not accurate. Almost every gun sold in America today and every day is virtually all of them have undergone background checks, and all of these shooters have. So the question really is, but that's what they're fixated on. So they want to, you see the House proposals, right? Oh, let's ban bump stocks and stuff like this. That all may be great and good ideas, but it has nothing to do with this, with the shootings. Wouldn't have prevented these shootings. So I think that's what's been standing in the way, maximalist demands that have nothing to do with how to solve the problem. And hopefully that'll change. Hopefully this time people will say, look, enough is enough. There's some things we can do that we agree on. Let's do the things we agree on. Let's do if there's something that works and we agree on it, why not do it?
Well, what's good about both of these bills, Senator, is that it tailors to the situation. It's not just a Band-Aid, so to speak. It actually impacts the actual situation that unfortunately is occurring in the United States too frequently.
Yeah, well, we have another gun crisis in America, and that is a bunch of criminals running loose in the streets, buying guns off the black market, stealing them from people's cars, and shooting each other up. And we've seen that violence surge. But these aren't people buying it at gun shows or online or anywhere. These are just people buying stolen guns from each other and then shooting each other up. That's a huge problem in America, but that's a criminality problem. And that's what happens when you let a bunch of criminals out of jail early because you're trying to be compassionate and trying to give people the fifth chance and things of that nature. So that's another problem. It's probably from a numerical standpoint, the most serious one. The solutions I'm talking about are very specifically tied to disturbed young men that head towards violence and commit these mass murders, and they're giving you warning signs and in Parkland, well in advance that this was going to happen. And in fact, there were efforts to get the local police to intervene. The sheriff's office didn't do it. That guy's no longer sheriff. The school district refused to do anything about it because they didn't want to criminalize kids. The FBI dropped the ball with 2 calls and warnings to their hotline. So there were a lot of missteps there that could have prevented this.
We just got an alert that President Biden is going to be addressing the nation tonight after this last shooting at the hospital and this wave of mass shootings. So, Senator Rubio, this is what I'm concerned about, is that typically what we've seen with President Biden in these comments is that statements that he keeps dividing all of us as a nation. And so it's divide. It's so political. It's about banning guns, banning this, banning everybody, instead of targeted solutions like you're talking about, targeted solutions to the school shooting issue and who is usually responsible for those and how to red flag them or how to give family members at the state level using state laws rights. But now we're going to hear from President Biden tonight. What I'm concerned about is that we're not going to hear solutions like that. We're going to hear solutions that keep dividing the country apart, which doesn't do anything to help keep our kids safe.
Yeah, and let's hope that that's not what happens. But traditionally, the response from him and others has been the following. Lie to people and tell them that there's a bunch of laws out there that could stop all this from happening, but we can't pass those laws because evil Republicans are blocking them. If they would only have voted for these bills, these things wouldn't be happening. And it's just not true. It's just absolutely inaccurate. It's not true. It's a blatant lie. It stands in the way of progress on this issue. And I hope that's not what he does again tonight, because if he starts rolling out a bunch of ideas that have nothing to do with these shootings, nothing. They may be what he supports on gun legislation, but they have nothing to do with these shootings. I think we're back to square one, unfortunately, and then people wonder why nothing ever happens. Well, that's why. I hope that's not the case.
Senator, we appreciate your work on this, and you've been working on this for a long time, and we fully support it. We think this is the right way to go. Thank you for being on the broadcast. Thank you for sharing this with our audience. It's important that people know what's happening here and that there are solutions. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you both for having me on.